Hello, good evening and a very warm welcome to the Spider's Web with me, your host, B. I hope wherever you are in the world, you're all happy and well. Tonight I'm back to the ghosties. There are a lot of haunted locations all over the world, and I've chosen some from the US that I didn't even know about. So settle in and enjoy the ghostly. Colonel James Withers Sloss was one of the founders of Birmingham, helping to promote railroad development in Jones Valley, Alabama, and participating in the Pratt Coke and Coal Company, one of the new city's first manufacturers. In 1881 he formed his own company, the Sloss Furnace Company, and began construction of Birmingham's first blast furnace on 50 acres of land donated by the Elliton Land Company for industrial development. The engineer in charge of construction was Harry Hargreaves, a former student of English inventor Thomas Whitwell. The two Whitwell-type furnaces were 60 feet tall and 18 feet in diameter. The first blast furnace was initiated in April 1882. The facility produced 24,000 tonnes of high-quality iron during its first year of operation. Sloss Furnace transformed ore into hard steel from 1882 to 1972. Many companies all over the country relied on Sloss furnaces to provide materials. In the early 1900s, a man by the name of James Wormwood, also known as Slag, was the foreman of the graveyard shift. He had 150 workers who kept the furnace fed. Wormwood was cruel to the workers. He made them take dangerous risks in order to impress the supervisors. During his time as a foreman, death records show that 47 men lost their lives, and there were many accidents that left some of the men unable to work again. The workers were also not allowed breaks or holidays. In 1906, Wormwood lost his footing at the top of the highest blast furnace, fell into a pool of melted iron ore and died instantly. There are many speculations about his death. Some people believe that he was pushed by the workers as an act of vengeance for his slave driving. People have reported all kinds of spooky happenings around the Sloss furnaces that would make even the most brave of paranormal investigators skin crawl. Some say they've heard voices, the sound of footsteps, the clanging of heavy metal chains against the furnaces, rapidly dropping temperatures around certain areas, and some say they've seen shadowy or glowing figures following them in the dark. A few have even reported a gentle pushing or shoving by an unknown force. James Slag Wormwood is undoubtedly the most famous ghost in Sloss Furnace. Since his death in 1906, workers have complained about seeing and feeling an unnatural presence at work. In 1926, a watchman was injured after he was pushed from behind and told to get back to work by an unknown presence. 3 supervisors were found knocked out in the boiler room in 1947. All of them claimed they were approached by a man who was burned badly and told to get back to work. In 1971, a night watchman named Samuel Blumenthal claimed to have come face to face with a half-demon and half-man who tried to push him up the stairs. When he refused, the being started to beat him. He was examined and found to have intense burns. Another reported Sloss spirit is of a former labourer, Theo Jowers, who died after falling into a molten metal pit at another local furnace. Although he died elsewhere, those who worked with him said he had a special connection to Sloss. After his death, many workers claimed to see Theo's spectre working alongside them during the day, sometimes even speaking to them. Other paranormal reports at Sloss furnaces have less certain origin. Disembodied voices have been heard echoing through the facility, most often the hollows of production orders or warnings. Some visitors have claimed to hear these voices telling them to mind the heat or push some steel. In a particular area of the furnace site, reportedly the place where a worker boiled to death in the late 1800s, objects are said to be moved by unseen forces. Sloss Furnaces today has been transformed from its industrial past to a proudly educational local landmark, with a focus on events and museum-style tours. But the ghost stories from its dangerous past continue to linger around Sloss. Emily's covered bridge in Stowe, Vermont, is no ordinary bridge. For all appearances, the bridge looks normal. It's just another bridge on a brook that was built in the 19th century. But the first clue that something isn't typical about this bridge is right in the name. Who's Emily? Because the official name of the bridge is the Goldbrook Covered Bridge. So what did Emily do to get the bridge named after her? Built in 1844, Emily's bridge was just 50 feet long over Goldbrook and was covered with dark wood that the elements haven't been merciful on ever since. But around the time the bridge was built, that dark wood was still new, smelling of fresh pine, and creaked every time a horse-drawn wagon crossed it. A young woman named Emily planned to elope with her lover. Their meeting place was this same bridge. But when he didn't show, Emily, filled with despair, hanged herself from the rafters of the Goldbrook Bridge. A sad story indeed, and anyone who hears it for the first time feels sorry for young Emily and her broken heart. Only Emily wasn't finished with the bridge just yet. Stories started making the rounds in the area of sightings of young Emily lurking around the bridge. Not the sweet and sorrowful Emily we learned about, but a vengeful Emily, full of wrath and apparently long nails. Emily was understandably upset at being jilted. Anyone would be. But for Emily to take it out on passing cars? Some would consider that overdramatic, but that's Emily. She started slashing cars passing over the bridge, leaving scars not unlike those left by Wolverine of X-Men fame. Even pedestrians crossing Emily's covered bridge are not safe, and the marks on their backs bear witness to Emily's fury, which hasn't abated after all these years. All sorts of stories emanate from this area about the haunting of Emily, including those of a strange voice emanating from inside the short tunnel. The RMS Queen Mary spent 3 decades transporting the rich and famous across the Atlantic before retiring in 1967. She survived the Great Depression and World War II and managed to avoid the tragic fate of her cousin, Titanic. But under the glitz and glamour, this haunted ship is hiding several dark secrets. It was a sunny day in 1936 when the Queen Mary departed from England on her maiden voyage. She offered all the finest amenities, exquisite dining rooms, swimming pools, daily radio broadcasts, a kennel for the passengers' dogs, a children's nursery, and even a hospital. And she was fast. Boasting a top speed of 32 knots, she could travel from England to New York in 4 days. Her parent company, the recently merged Cunard White Star Line, was desperate for success. Cunard had gone broke during the Great Depression, and the White Star Line was still scarred by the Titanic and Britannic. Their fates rested on the Mary, and it seemed their luck had finally turned. The RMS Queen Mary dominated transatlantic travel, holding the blue riband from 1938 to 1952, and welcoming celebrities, politicians and even royalty. But the world was in turmoil. At the outbreak of World War II, the famed ocean liner became a military transport ship, hauling between 5,000 and 15,000 soldiers across the world, and that's when things took a dark turn. At least 47 people died aboard the Queen Mary during her time at sea. A young crew member named John Pedder was crushed by a door during an emergency drill. Another died after drinking gin that turned out to be cleaning fluid. The rest died of natural causes, or that's what the official records report. But hundreds of others are said to have died on, or at the hands of, the Queen Mary prior to her retirement. In 1939 the ship was drafted into military service. Britain believed her size and speed would keep her safe from German U-boats, and they were right. She was stripped of her fine decor and amenities in order to create more space. Her bright smokestacks were painted navy grey, and her portholes were blacked out and welded shut. The transformation earned her the nickname Grey Ghost. In the summer, soldiers slept shoulder to shoulder above deck and took turns sleeping in bunks below deck. The lack of airflow made the cabins suffocatingly hot. Some soldiers died from heat exhaustion, others jumped ship. The Mary was no longer a luxurious cruise ship, it was hell. Legend says the staff went half crazy too. One rather gruesome rumour is that galley crew locked the chef in his own oven one night, roasting him alive. Though there are no records of the chef's demise, there is substantial evidence that the Mary was responsible for deaths of over 300 men. In October of 1942, the famed ship accidentally collided with the HMS Curacao, a much smaller cruiser that was escorting her around the Irish coast. The Curacao was zigzagging in front of the Mary, hoping to throw off any potential missile attacks, when the 82,000-ton ship mistakenly ploughed into it, breaking it in half. Some of the crew died instantly, others drowned or succumbed to the hypothermia in the freezing water. The Mary never stopped to rescue them, as it would have compromised the thousands of soldiers on board, and an estimated 329 men died as a result. The ship is reportedly haunted by over 100 spirits, the most infamous being the spirit of stateroom B340, where paranormal activity is so frequent and intense that some members of the crew refuse to go inside. Everyone seems to have their own story about who or what haunts the room. In 1948, a third-class passenger named Walter J. Adamson mysteriously died there. Is it his ghost that haunts the place, or was he killed by the ghost? Another theory claims staff locked a man in his third-class room after he murdered 2 women in the 1960s. During the night, he began beating on the door, screaming to the guard outside that something was in the room with him. When they opened the door in the morning, they found his bloody, mangled body. He'd been ripped apart. When the ship was retired in 1967, 3 third-class rooms were combined to create a larger hotel room, B340. Not long after, guests began reporting odd things. One woman said she was woken when the bed covers were ripped off her in the middle of the night. She then saw a man looming over the end of the bed. Others heard phantom voices and complained that the faucets turned on by themselves. The ship received so many negative reports through the 1970s that B340 was closed to the public for over 30 years. It was reopened as a haunted attraction in 2018, though the key comes with a fierce warning. Even the current captain is too scared to enter. Other haunted areas include the former first-class swimming pool, boiler room number 4, and the doorway where John Pedder was tragically crushed during an emergency drill. Pedder's ghost is often spotted wearing blue coveralls. Sometimes he'll run behind people whistling, as if to warn them. Other times he'll ask guests if they've seen his wrench. When they turn back to him, he's gone. The sheer amount of ghostly activity on board the Queen Mary has earned it the title of most haunted ship in the world, and it attracts as many paranormal fanatics as it does history buffs. Still, even in the light of day, there's something creepy about Mary. The ship is a relic of a bygone era. With the exception of a few modern updates, the Mary still looks like she did in her heyday, grand and glamorous. It's known as the Ship of Woods, due to the impressive number of mixed woods used in its construction. As you walk up to its massive black hull, you might feel the same rush of excitement that coursed through passengers the day it was launched. On that May morning, the Queen Mary was still innocent and hopeful. But this haunted ship holds as much evil as it does hope now. Marred by war, neither time nor renovation can bury the dark secrets of the RMS Queen Mary. This imposing Gothic Revival church is situated on San Antonio's main plaza, and it goes by the name San Fernando Cathedral. Built in 1738, it was named after the 13th century King Ferdinand III of Castile, Spain, who was largely responsible for creating an atmosphere of peace among his Christian, Muslim and Jewish citizens. On multiple occasions, shadowed ghostly figures have been spotted wandering round the grounds of the cathedral. On one occasion, a guest on a ghost tour stood listening to her guide regale her with tales of the church itself. But even as she stood there, her gaze continued to track a strange man who seemed to be following the tour. He trailed them, following them from the front of the cathedral and then again when they edged toward the back of the historic site. And then he simply disappeared. When she tried to describe him, she likened his all-black clothing to the dress style of the 18th or 19th centuries. She'd initially thought him to be another tour guide joining the group, but his abrupt disappearance suddenly had her wondering if he hadn't been a ghost himself. To make matters even stranger, a few others of the tour-goers had witnessed the same dark-shadowed apparition, leaving all to wonder, who was he? Other people meandering past the historic yet haunted landmark have reported the manifestation of other shadowy figures by the walls and next to the doors of the cathedral. According to some who have seen these spectres, many of the ghostly shadows have appeared with hoods drawn down over their faces. Are these apparitions the residual energy of the monks who once established San Antonio and who may have worshipped at San Fernando Cathedral? Almost always, these dark figures have appeared in the back of the cathedral and have been known to manifest and vanish almost at will. But of all the paranormal occurrences which have been seen at the cathedral, the ghostly monks seem to be the most frequently spotted. Perhaps they're unwilling to leave their house of worship, or perhaps they are simply unable to leave the place where their physical bodies may have been buried, within the walls or under the floor of the church. Over the years, San Fernando Cathedral's haunted reputation has grown tremendously. Because of its innate spiritual ambience as a house of worship, it's not so surprising that there might be a ghost or two still roaming the grounds. On Halloween in 2007, the common orb sightings took a step back to make way for a rather incredulous paranormal incident. Workers were conducting a restoration project on the cathedral by removing old plaster from the original stone. Plans were set in place to replaster the walls. Despite the construction, the cathedral was still open for visitors, one of whom happened to be touring San Fernando with his handheld video camera. He captured the marble sarcophagus in the back, which many visitors claim to be ghostly cool to the touch at times, as well as the seal on the ground which confirms the church's old age. Then, without any sort of warning, he captured the visceral image of a man kissing a skull on the head. He panicked, realising that not a single soul was in sight. The image he'd captured on his camera had been nothing but a shimmering apparition of a ghost from long ago. Perched near the banks of the Missouri River in Kansas, the Sally House is an unassuming little stone house, which became the focus of intense publicity in the 1990s, when a married couple reported that the husband was being repeatedly attacked and tormented by the ghost of a little girl named Sally. As legend has it, Sally died from a botched appendectomy around 1905. She apparently never forgave the doctor and has repeatedly attacked males who enter the house. Apart from the ghost of a little girl attacking males and leaving scratch and burn marks on them, the following paranormal phenomena have also been observed at the Sally House. The sounds of animals, girls, boys, men and women. Many mysterious voices speaking audibly and in English have been captured in the house using EVP. Unexplainable thumps, knocks, thuds and the sounds of non-existent furniture moving. Lights turning on and off by themselves. Bricks flying at people's heads out of nowhere when they venture down into the basement. Dogs barking at unseen objects. Areas in rooms that are strangely cold. Fires erupting out of nowhere. Picture frames turned upside down. Extreme smells such as the odour of burning sulphur. Objects moving and levitating. Weirdly shaped and coloured orbs appearing in photographs taken at the house. And stuffed animals, teddy bears specifically, rearranging themselves in an upstairs bedroom. Although the Sally House was built in the 1870s, nearly all of the paranormal activity started in the 1990s, when a young married couple moved into this unassuming little white stone house on North 2nd Street in Atchison, Kansas. Tony and Deborah Pickman moved into the house while newly married, and Deborah was pregnant with her son Taylor. On the morning of October the 31st, 1993, after getting home from work, Tony says he went into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of milk, when he was startled by the sight of a young girl staring at him, and she seemed to be startled at the sight of him too. He dropped his glass to the floor where it shattered into pieces, and ran upstairs, terrified, to see Deborah. It was only later that he recalled the little girl was wearing a white dress that looked like it came from the 1800s. According to Deborah, Tony ran into their bedroom out of breath and said, "I saw her, I saw her." When she asked who he saw, he said Sally. Over the next 2 years, and sometimes on camera as film crews were taping, Tony would suddenly become covered in bloody scratches and burn marks. A few times he was knocked backward onto the floor and pinned down, as if an invisible force was restraining him. Deborah says that in an attempt to appease Sally's spirit, they bought her gifts such as toy dolls, but the attacks on Tony didn't stop. Deborah says, "Now Tony would usually not acknowledge her, and on one occasion I left the room, leaving him lying on the couch, and she bit him on the back of his thigh. The bite didn't break the skin, but did leave teeth marks, in accordance to that of a young child. I don't remember why we didn't take photos of this. I should also mention that our baby Taylor was only a few months old and had no teeth. In addition, the locations of the teeth marks were such that Tony would have had to have been a contortionist to make them." After 2 years, the Pickmans had had enough and moved elsewhere. They returned about a decade later with psychic investigators. The first few visits proceeded without incident, but after a few safe visits, Deborah says Tony was assaulted again. Tony was brutally attacked only minutes later, being lifted and thrown 4 feet backwards into a door, and unable to get up because a force was holding him down. It was only the words, "In the name of God, let him go," that enabled him to get back on his feet to flee the house and its grip. "We fled the house so fast that we didn't notice the damage that the door hitting the wall had done, but contacted the owner to let him know what had happened." According to Deborah Pickman, several other spirits besides Sally also infest the house. Agnes Finney, daughter of the couple who owned the house longer than anyone else. Brandon, an easily irritated, dominant adult male with a good sense of humour who pranks adults in order to make children laugh. Charles Finney, an older male with an effeminate vocal effect who decades ago competed as an ice skater while dressed as a female. Edith, a senile older woman whom everyone seems to love. Frank Jr., a man who died in Kansas City a year after Sally died, when his mum botched a suicide attempt that killed him, but that she survived. Joanna Barnes, a dominant female who lived next door to the Sally house until 1906, and whose ghostly voice was allegedly captured on audio. Paul, a young slave boy who was lynched. It's unclear what his relation is to the house, since slavery was over long before the house was built. Ryan, a relative of Sally's who speaks with a slight accent, and Tom Burns, a former Civil War soldier who sometimes appears in the house dressed in his military uniform. The Sally house has been featured on various paranormal TV shows and even a movie. You can actually rent the house to stay in. I don't think I'd want to bother though. Once home to 10,000 people, Bodie boomed in the 1870s and 80s when gold was found in the hills surrounding Mono Lake. It's now a state historic park, with some parts of the town preserved in a state of arrested decay, tables with place settings, and shops eerily stocked with supplies. It's not surprising that there are many reports of supernatural activity here, including ghost sightings and music playing from shuttered bars. There is also a legend that any visitor who takes anything, even a rock, from Bodie will be cursed with bad luck and health problems upon leaving. One of the oldest theatres in America, this site in downtown Charleston, South Carolina, has racked up a lot of tumult and history over the years. After a fire burned down the original theatre, the Planters Inn was built on the spot. It was converted back to a theatre in the 1930s. The most flamboyant ghost here is Nettie Dickerson, who, legend has it, was struck by lightning while standing on the balcony of the hotel. Her shadow has been reported gliding along the second floor of the theatre, dressed in a red gown. Also in otherworldly attendance, Junius Brutus Booth, a renowned 19th century actor and the father of Lincoln assassin John Wilkes, who used to frequent the inn. Dubbed the Lady in Waiting, the apparition at Honolulu International Airport is a blonde woman in a white dress who shows up in off-limits areas of the airport. According to legend, the woman fell in love with a man who promised to marry her, while she was still alive of course, but then he hopped on an international flight and abandoned her at the gate. Her ghost is still waiting for him to return. People have reported other strange occurrences as well, like toilet paper rolls that unravel on their own and toilets that flush by themselves. With its 16 floors, 1,000 plus rooms and Gothic facade, the Masonic Temple is one of the most imposing additions to Detroit's skyline. According to rumours, there's also more to it than meets the eye, like hidden passageways and staircases. The most famous urban myth associated with the temple, however, is that of its architect, George D. Mason. Legend has it that Mason went bankrupt funding the construction and then leapt to his death from the roof. You'll be hard-pressed to find facts to back up this tale, but it certainly does help to explain reports of a ghost climbing the steps to the roof of the building. And that, my lovely viewers, is all for this evening. Thank you again for tuning in. I've loved chatting to you all. Don't forget, I've got 2 books out on Amazon, just a little plug. And I shall be back here next week with another tale. And hopefully I won't be cutting it as fine as I did this week, because this trapped nerve in my shoulder has really put the mockers on doing quite a lot. So it's wearing off now. I'll be fine by next week. So until then, stay happy, stay lucky, stay healthy, stay safe, and most of all, stay spooky.